So well, let's go around one more time and just say out your name, and in one short sentence, 5 words or something like that, just say what are you working on, or what kind of question you are dealing with. And shall we start from which side? Where we started last time? Did you start from you? Yeah? Okay, so let's start with you.
Okay, my name is Dario, and I'm working right now on centrality of 3D print.
My name is Matilde, and I'm working on obsession.
My name is Rupert, and I'm working on what is not in my painting.
My name is Lucrezia. I'm working on the natural repulsive functions of the lumen.
I'm Ethan. I'm eating my porridge.
But I'm working on using small film camera to collecting because there's 2 cameras on here. Which one is on here?
About 5 words.
I want to capture the unintended moment.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Maximilian, and I'm working on the death of Gilles.
Hi, I'm Siobhan. I'm working on today how to bring back drawing into my work.
I'm Carolina, and I may work on Kalpa or another thing.
Do you hear it?
I may work on Kalpas or another thing.
Copper.
Kalpa.
I'm Sean. I'm working on some new evaluation.
I'm Julia, and I'm working on how can I visualize a social sculpture.
I'm Ben, and I'm trying to figure out After Effects.
I'm Esther, and I'm experimenting with trying to print prism or light spectrum.
I'm Alex, and I'm trying to fit concrete poetry into my work now.
My name is Simona, and my question is, what is the point?
I'm Ben, and I'm working on the is.
I'm Catherine, and I build a shelter. I'm Irene, and I'm working on my internship.
I'm Vinicius. I am looking at the digital information in historical paintings.
I'm Lisa, and I want to use Word as adult in my artwork.
I'm being recently, I just can't stop writing my recipe.
Thank you very much. So how did it feel? Is it getting easier? Okay, so let's just remind you the story so far, or how we got to this strange point that we suddenly get into Heidegger's really not simple essay, The Question Concerning Technology. Yeah, if you had a look at it, I guess you probably noticed that it's not the easiest text to read. It's not a walk in the park. Even the essay on the thing kind of seems quite simple in comparison. Yeah. So I want to reassure you, I'm not doing that because I want to torment you or to test your intellect. I hope at the end of the session to show you that actually there are some very amusing and maybe even useful things we can find in this text. But just to know how to go around it, it's a skill in itself. Sometimes people come to me and say, I don't think I understood everything. Well, I'm not sure Heidegger understood everything. But I think if you can say that you understood, let's say, 0.1%, it could be completely enough, and it could be already an achievement. So that's what I will try to do today, to maybe get our 1% worth of the question concerning technology. So how did we come to this point? Well, the first question we asked around this table a few weeks ago was, what is representation? Yeah, and we approached it through Lyotard. Lyotard then seemed to suggest that the presentation is a complex operation that involves the visual field, images and aesthetics, as well as the political field in terms of the way social space and power are organized. And while we didn't speak about it directly, also an economic field in terms of abstract value replacing physical exchange. So Lyotard took this question of representation, of visual representation, and placed it at the very center of the way things are stuck together. Then we moved on to Heidegger last week, and Heidegger was asking a kind of very provocative or naive question. He was saying, well, how come with all this advanced technology that we have that saves us massive amount of time and puts us in various places, why we are not any closer? Why we are not any happier, in other words? Why the one thing that we cannot claim for is an excess of intimacy, or of compassion, or of care for the world, for each other. How come, in other words, the advancement of science is not matched by spiritual or social advancement? I think one way to get into what he was saying, what Heidegger is getting into, is to, for instance, consider how medicine, contemporary medicine, knows how to keep people alive for, into their 90s, into their hundreds. Loads and loads of people now live much longer than even a few decades ago. But the social networks didn't grow at the same rate, too much the technical advance. So you have this population of people who are alive, but they're also kind of walking wounded because they don't have the supportive networks of care. Yeah? So I think this is one way to understand how Heidegger just draws our attention to this uneven pace of technology on the one hand, that advances, we are told that computer speed doubles every 5 years. Anyone knows exactly? The famous law, how often the computer processing speed doubles? Every couple of years, I believe. But our ability for compassion doesn't double every couple of years. That, Heidegger says, is in itself quite interesting. He draws our attention to something very elementary. But in that lies his greatness. In a sense, this is one of the principles in many artworks, that they draw our attention to this really overlooked, forgotten element. So that was Heidegger's question. And in order to start building the possibility of understanding the question better, he discussed the job. And he said, well, there are two ways basically to think about this job. And, for our purposes, we also need to try to understand what can be said about an image, in parallel to this discussion of the job. The image and the job have quite a lot in common, according to Heidegger. Both hold something. The image might be holding a memory, or information, or data, yeah? But the image could be thought as a kind of placeholder. Do you understand this word? What is a placeholder? Yeah? But it holds something. Even the placeholder still holds something. Maybe the memory of something that was there and then gone. But the memory is still there in the placeholder. Yeah? So the image could be thought as a placeholder of a memory, a moment lost, an evening spent with a friend, you know, and you take a selfie, or you know, childhood memories. So the image could be thought in that way as something that preserves and stores a little bit in the same way that the jug holds, let's say, water or wine. Yeah, so the image also holds something. So Heidegger there makes this very interesting move by saying that you can discuss this jug from two perspectives. You can look at it either from the scientific perspective that will describe it or analyze it. But for our purpose, you could say, well, you could approach it photographically on one level as making an accurate representation of the jug. Yeah? Then you might ask, well, how should we lead it to really show that it is three-dimensional? Where should we place the camera? Which lens should we use? Maybe maintain the exact proportions. You know, how can we make the image as close to the jug as possible? And if you look, for instance, at some archaeological books or books about pottery in the library, you will see that some of the photographers, especially the black and white images, are absolutely outstanding in communicating the volume and the three-dimensional shape. So we could have all this discussion about how to represent the jug in the photographic image. And for Heidegger, this is the common, the normal way by which science operates, by which we engage with the world, by just dealing with these questions of accurate representation. There is another approach, Heidegger says, which is hidden from us. That's why kind of we need Heidegger to point us towards it. And in this approach, the jug is not explored scientifically, but in terms of its role in human life. What does it mean? Not what the jug is, but what does it mean? In what way the jug means something else from a hammer? In what way the jug means something else from a horse? Because if you're just concerned with making an accurate representation, do you really care whether it is a jug or a horse? You know, you can imagine a professional photographer with their photographic equipment, one day making portraits of horses, next day of little children, next day of someone's pottery, all to the highest professional standard. Does it really matter for that photographer what is in front of the lens? Yeah? What matters is how to execute this image in the best possible way for the purpose for which photography is used. Yeah? So, are you okay so far? You following this little story? So that's the one approach, yeah? In which what is there really only, it matters as a physical object. But Heidegger says the other approach will not ask how to photograph this jug in the most objective way, but it will ask how to communicate or put forward what the jug means. What the jug means to you. What the jug means. What the jug means. What does it mean? Why is it here? And without these human connections, without this exploring the role of this object, of this thing, in the networks of human relations, there is no jug to speak of. The jug only exists in as much as it is to store something, to offer something, to protect something. That is the only reason for the jug to be. If you take these things away, if you disregard the protection, the holding, the pouring, the gifting, the looking after guests, if you discard all that, there is no jug. You might have some clay, yeah, but not every jug, not every piece of clay is a jug. Without the human intention, there is no jug. Does it make sense? Because, yeah, you know it, but can you also, we also appreciate how far out this way of thinking from our normal day-to-day habitual thinking. Because this way of thinking says none of this is what it seems. This is not a table. There is no table as such. It's our language, our engagement with the world. It's only a table for us. Yeah? So then the question becomes, what will be the role of the photographer in that case? Because it is not anymore about how to represent this jar in the best possible way. It is about how to explore what the jar means. Yeah? So this is a little photography task for you for next week. That would be interesting, no? As a challenge to answer this question, what this jar means and how to respond to that photographically. Now, in another essay, which we will not read this year, I think, the origin of the work of art. Martin Heidegger looks at this painting by Van Gogh of a pair of peasant shoes. Do you know this painting? It's hard to know which ones are original and often which are imitations. But if we just if we take this, for instance, I guess you could say that in this painting of the shoes, you could understand why Heidegger says that here this image is not striving after the accurate representation of the shoe as a physical object, but really it is tracing all the human histories, all the walking in the fields, all the life of the peasant for whom these shoes are the protection for their feet, you know, who has to wear them to go into the field to look after the family. There is something Heidegger says in this image that calls to mind all the networks, all the social connections, all the cultural webs that only when they're woven together you get this pair of shoes. Yeah? So I think that's why I think it's an interesting question for someone who works with technical art, with photography. What does it mean to look at a pair of shoes in this way? I mean, does it mean applying some kind of blur, for instance? Does it mean using a Vaseline lens? Maybe it means turning away from the camera entirely. But that's what I think Heidegger provokes us to say. How can we approach this jar in another way than just bringing its most accurate photographic for a reason, representation. Yeah, and that's more or less where we left it last time. So today we are going to talk about the essay "Question Concerning Technology" from this collection of essays. Before we move on, do you have any questions at this stage? Any thoughts, any suggestions? Is anything we spoke about here, does it resonate with anything you saw in art or in your own work?
I went to a lecture yesterday by an artist called Castles, and her practice was becoming an image, which was an interesting concept of when language fails us to communicate compassion, how do we react to what we see on the news, to what we joy, whatever it may be. So, yeah, that's when I was reading this text as well. I was thinking those two together.
Very interesting. Is there anyone else who has some thoughts about what we discuss and how it connects to anything in your world? Okay. Well, we'll come back to that by the end of the session. So, I mean, if you had to go at reading this, you really passed your baptism of fire, as far as I'm concerned. You know, you are now enlisted in the ranks of the philosophers. Because this is really difficult text, you know, and I'm not saying it in a kind of patronizing way, it is very difficult text. The first few times when I was reading it, and it was maybe 10 years ago, I was like, what is going on? And then the way I managed to go through it is by somehow capturing in one sentence, in my own words, each paragraph. I think first I started just by identifying a key sentence in every paragraph, and then trying to capture it in my own words. And then I had in the end a list of these sentences, so I could reconstruct the argument. But I really had to work through like every sentence. I mean, I would never claim to have full grasp of this text. But the interesting thing is that you never need. It works on any level. You can understand one sentence, and it can work for you. It's not because it is much. It's because I think there are some things that come across there that are immensely useful once we find a way to tune ourselves to this specific language. But I want to start from something quite straightforward and just to show you how you can approach this text and get something out of it for your own use. On the very first page of the question, we need to okay, I mean, I just want to draw your attention to this, for instance. Maybe someone can just read for us the first few sentences, just up to here. We don't even get into the question of technology. So, could anyone just read that for us, please? Yes.
In what follows, we shall be questioning concerning technology. Questioning builds a way. We would be advised, therefore, above all to pay heed to the way and not to fix our attention on isolated sentences and topics. The way is a way of thinking. All ways of thinking more or less perceptibly lead through language in a manner that is extraordinary.
Great, thank you very much. So, what is that about? Do you get any sense out of it? What does it mean to say we would be advised, therefore, above all, to pay heed to the way and not to fix our attention on isolated sentences and topics? What does it mean? Exactly. No, not so much even as a whole, but follow the direction of travel, but don't really get focused on the objects beside the road. Yeah, there might be a broken bottle, there might be a crushed paper cup. Don't notice these things, just follow the road. Why? Why do you think it's important?
Because you have a total concept of every
Because it's easy to get distracted. It's easy to go to habitual ways of not paying attention. It's easy to build an argument, saying, oh look, you gave us this example, and and if I push it to its logical conclusion, it doesn't really stick, And Heidegger says, don't worry too much about the examples, don't worry too much about the individual case studies. Each case study in its own might be imperfect, but notice instead the direction in which I'm taking it. So if you want to take issue with me, take issue with the direction, not with the individual case study. I think it's a kind of very interesting gesture to the reader to say basically, that's how you need to read me. Try to stay tuned to the movement. Stay with the movement, not with the objects. So already, you see, already in this sentence, there is a kind of gap opening between the objects on the side of the road and movement. Yeah? And it appears that movement is the key here. Right. So, and the next sentence is the way this road we spoke about is the road of thinking. So now we know what road we are traveling. On what road Heidegger is taking us? On the road to thinking. And Heidegger, by the way, has another book that's called On the Way to Language. So this metaphor of the way, it's very important. On the way to thinking, Heidegger is taking us. So far, we just know if you want to go towards thinking, follow the path, not the objects on the sides of the road. All ways of thinking, more or less perceptibly, leads to language in a manner that is extraordinary. So what does it mean? I think this is quite an interesting sentence. All ways of thinking, more or less perceptibly, lead through language in a manner that is extraordinary. Simple words, no? What actually is it saying? Anyone has any kind of, just even like a tale of a hint, what it might be?
Think outside the box, because we respond to things instantly.
That's good. I think that really captures it. Think outside the box. It's nasty. Sorry?
An argument on language. Anyway, is a speculative thinking, so it starts from language.
So yeah, thinking and language for Heidegger are very closely connected. That's what you're saying, Maria, yeah?
Yeah.
Thinking and language. Do you think, so for Heidegger, and that's actually an excellent point, for Heidegger, thinking and language are the same, yeah, or they, thinking needs to go through language. Do you think this is the only way by which thinking can travel? I'm asking you as you. Do you think the only way to think is through language?
Well, you have to put your thinking in some kind of language to communicate that.
Yeah.
So it's not about just the language as English or Spanish or French. It's about in all kinds of language you can express it.
So do you think photography can be a language through which someone can express himself? Excellent. No, I think it's really important to bear in mind this expanded notion of language. Yeah. But what is even more interesting here is, so thought